chance to sit near, I don't know, because I'm not sure it will be easy to follow. I'm sorry. Okay, so I think we have to continue. So we were talking about moods, so-called moods, oblique moods in Kalmyk, and we've discussed several things which were related to the imperative domain, let's say. So several moods which are labeled by different terms, but in fact somehow are related by causation, by the act of speech, by the speech act. A different mood which is specific to Mongolic languages and not very widespread typologically is something which can be referred to as apprehensive. Alternative terms are admonitive, preventive, and sometimes dubitive, but apprehensive is largely legitimized with, among other things, by Nina Bushensberg and their studies of Dagestanian languages. So this finally at least one rare typological feature which is shared by Kalmyk and Northern Dagestan, but I don't think it's in fact there is any connection except for probably high probability of preservation of something which was inherited from the Mongolic sources, because it's also found in in other Mongolic languages. So what's apprehensive? Apprehensive is a mood which is used when the speaker is afraid that some undesirable situation may come true. So we see, or probably we don't see, example 35 here. So I will be pronouncing some things which are here in our presentation. So the context is something like, I'm going alone to the woods. It's not an apprehensive clause, but the next one, I'm afraid you might get lost, or something like, be aware and try not to get lost or something. But it's a long translation into English, but in Kalmyk it's just basically, well, it's a complex verb, but could have been expressed by the verb meaning to get lost with a specific mood marker, which means exactly be aware and try not to do this and that. So unlike imperative-like moods, this kind of mood is not related to person distinction. So it's possible to for the first person, for the second person, and for the third person. So I'm afraid I can slip here, or I'm afraid he might die, or something like that. Be aware and not. I hope that a particular person will take care not to do that and that, and something like that. Okay, so this is fully grammaticalized, and well, it corresponds to something like spontaneous zabludis or compatibility zabludis in Russian, something like that. So, but here we see just a dedicated morphological marker, something slightly unusual. So, as I said, it's found in some Dagestanian languages, but what is probably more important is that it's also found not only in other Mongolic languages, but also at least in Ivan and Niv, and maybe Ivan is not exceptional, so maybe other linguistic languages as well. I'm not quite sure about this. So it might be an old aerial feature of this Far East region from which Mongolic languages stem from. Okay, so maybe some areas involved. Just a brief comment about negation in oblique moods. Kalmyk, along with other Mongolic languages, has a dedicated negative marker, which is used exclusively in imperative-like and apprehensive contexts. So this is something like an analytical form, and exceptionally, this grammaticalized form is used in actually linearly precedes the verb, unlike anything else you can find, unlike almost anything else you can find in Kalmyk. So, if only my father doesn't see me, he just can, or Kuyukan Vichaka then that, don't keep your daughter at home, let her go somewhere else to the club. So, Vicha is exactly this marker I'm talking about, and in fact it's marks negation in imperative context, but a nice feature of this is that it has some head-like properties despite being preceded to the verb. So for example, it can be used in isolation, some bicha bicha, would mean something like don't do this, without specifying without specifying what's exactly the action. So it's very salient, let's say, as a separate word. So slightly unusual in terms of Kalmyk grammar, although typologically this is a very common feature. So many languages do make a distinction between indicative and imperative in terms of the ways in which negation is expressed, and in particular it is very common in Northern Eurasia. So the green things here are languages where the prohibitive meaning is expressed by a combination of an imperative form together with a dedicated negative marker. So it's slightly redundant because imperative is already there, so why not use regular negation as in Russian or most European or Western European languages. But no, here it's completely different. So Pichai is inherently imperative and negative. Okay, I will briefly comment like a commentary on something we've already discussed. We've gone through aspectuality and tense more or less, but there was one marginal phenomenon as such, so we'll speak about habituality a little bit, the ways in which habituality is expressed. But the reason why I want to stress this pattern is not because the very meaning of habituality is important for me, but rather because the ways in which habituality is expressed is characterized by a specific combination of person and elocutionary force meanings, which can be referred to as egophoricity or sometimes as conjunct-disjunct system. So what's egophoricity is that? Let's take this example. So the present habitual meaning can be expressed generally in the grammar of Kalmyk, can be expressed by two different devices. So one is the present tense forms, which we discussed. So just not without progressive. Probably some of you remember this. That's one possibility. But apart from this, there is also habitual participle, let's say. So again, insubordination. So a form which is originally participle can sometimes be used as a main clause predicate. But what's interesting is that the choice between these two possibilities is, well, mostly, largely, almost fully dependent on the combination of two features. So one is person and another is whether there is interrogation involved. So there are exactly two combinations where the speaker can prefer to use as dedicated habitual participle as a finite form in order to express its meaning. And these two combinations are when the speaker expresses some affirmative, not necessarily affirmative, but some statement about himself, or about him and some. So first person, not necessarily singular. And the other possibility is when there is a question in which the subject is second person. Okay? So once again, these two cells, I say something, I do something, or do you do something? In these two cases, the habitual meaning is expressed by a dedicated habitual participle. Otherwise, we see, let's say, the default pattern with just present tense forms. I present this situation slightly more black and white than it is in reality, but the pattern is definitely there. So let's see some examples. Okay, let's try to see. Maybe you won't, but you will have to believe. Something like, whenever he hits me, I weep, I cry, or something like that. It is more likely to be used with who will do, so the participle, rather than just present tense. What about, you go to school every day, od nudge, so na, just regular present tense, but do you go to school every day is oddities, so the participle, the habitual participle. So depending on whether you make a statement or ask a question, speakers prefer to use different forms. Okay, it's not visible, I'm sorry. I don't know how to do this. Anyway, so this is the participle and this is the present tense form. Okay, so do you follow the pattern? So, well, even if you don't see the examples, have to believe that they are there. All right. So of course, it's at first it looks like completely arbitrary choice, but then of course there's some rationale behind the system like that. So what's the rationale? The rationale is that in both combinations I mentioned, this there is the person who is responsible for the assertion is the same person who is also the protagonist or actor in the situation described. Okay, so in fact there are many languages where egophoricity was found in tense aspect systems, so it makes a difference whether you can say something that you know for sure or you don't. So simplifying somewhat, or grossly simplifying, I can say that, well, if you do something regularly and you say it about yourself, you can rely on your previous knowledge of these events. Yeah? So you have a very direct access to what's going on there. Yeah? And the same is also true about the interlocutor. So do you go to school every day? Is a question that the interlocutor has a very good knowledge about. But the speaker generally does not, so it might be an inference if you saw this once or twice, but generally the one who can really claim this, the only person who does this is the interlocutor. So I think that's the explanation why these two things combine together. So as a very, very, very remote parallel, I can think about some meanings that are typically expressed in these two combinations. For example, let's take a verb like. People often say things like, I like this book, because, well, you know that you like it. People don't ask questions about themselves too often, and generally it doesn't make much sense to ask things like, do I like this book? But anyway, with the first person questions, it's problematic with all kinds of verbs. But let's think about the second person. Is it very natural to say something like, you like this book? Not really. It's very useless to inform your interlocutor about a situation like that. And evidently your interlocutor knows better if he or she likes this book in fact. But making a question is a completely different thing. So do you like this book is a very natural question. So it's something that your interlocutor knows and you probably want to know, and he or she is responsible for the assertion. So at least in terms of frequency, we can say that like, okay, statements about first person and questions about second person, especially with verbs like, not necessarily like, I know, you can say something like, you look beautiful, something like that. That's something which is okay to say about a different person in some cultures. Because it's an information where the speaker has probably no less access to the kind of information that the speaker has no less access than the interlocutor. But with things like or habituality, it's not the same story, because habituality, you can observe that someone is actually moving towards the school, but whether or not it happens regularly, well, you don't have direct access to information like that. So I'm trying to explain the machinery of this, although probably it doesn't make much sense in this particular course, because paradigms like that were discovered in many, in different languages, and in fact, even in Kalmyk, habituality is not the only domain of grammar where there is some asymmetry, more or less, of this kind, although maybe this one is the most straightforward, let's say. So anyway, I wanted to mention it in these words. Okay, a few words about negation. So Kalmyk is very rich in terms of grammaticalized means of expressing negation. We already know that, for example, there is a predicate marker which is used in imperative-like contexts, but there are no less than 3 other markers as well, and depending on how you analyze them, maybe 6. Negation is very, very asymmetrical. I'm not sure if you know what symmetrical or asymmetrical negation. Should I explain? You don't. Okay, so symmetrical negation is a situation where you make you take an affirmative sentence And in order to build a negated sentence, you just add a negative marker, that's it. Okay? Be it a prefix or a particle or combination of two particles or something like that. Okay? But in Kalmyk it's completely different. So you have to rebuild the sentence quite a lot, very often. So for example, let's have some example here. Okay, you won't see it. And, let's take 42, for example. I can live with you. That's just the present tense form. So Chernov, it is just the present tense form in number 42. But in order to express the idea of that I can't live with you, you can't just take a finite present tense form and add some marker. It's not possible. Nothing like that works. What you have to do instead is actually say something like chat khushuv, where the finite form is something which is in different contexts used as a future tense marker. So you make semantically there is nice parallelism. So in order to make a denial of a statement in the present, you have to use a construction where a future tense form is used and add the negative marker to that construction. There is a historical explanation of this. So historically, most types of negative constructions in Kalmyk are actually combinations where the negative part was used to be a negative auxiliary verb, which was finite. And a finite auxiliary cannot combine with another finite form. And present tense form is historically finite. It always was. Whereas the future tense form, probably you remember this, maybe you don't, but you can even see, if you're lucky, from the gloss, that it's historically a participle. So then it's very good. So it's historically a combination of something like a negative copula or a negative auxiliary with a nominalized, non-finite form of the verb. Okay? And this is also true about other finite forms. So in order to make negative sentences which correspond to meanings which are normally expressed by finite forms, you use different forms. So this brings lots of asymmetry to the system. Okay, so there is some. And here we see an example of this same negative marker in terms of its history or grammaticalization source. So this sh, which we see here as a negative marker, is actually something which comes from the sh, which is a negative copula. You are not a groom to me, will be expressed like you are not to you. Okay, so this expresses both the idea of finiteness, negation, and it takes a agreement marker, so it looks like a present tense auxiliary, so the negative part. It's used as a copula, but in combination with some nominalized verbal forms, it can be used in finite constructions as well. Okay, probably with this. A few words about agreement. So agreement is not particularly interesting in Kalmyk itself, although it's a topic which is largely discussed in a pan-Mongolic perspective, because it's a very important intra-Mongolic isoclass. So, interestingly, well, as elsewhere in many other parts of the world, agreement markers, finite agreement markers, are traced back to personal pronouns, which are angliticized to verb forms. Okay? But whether or not this process actually took place depends on which particular Mongolic languages you learn. So it didn't happen in Buddhism and Kalmyk and some other peripheral Mongolic languages, but it has famously didn't happen in Halkha Mongolian. So probably language contact was involved here, because probably Halkha Mongolian was influenced by Tibetan and its literary structure with no agreement, whereas other Mongolic languages probably were in contact with linguistic in some way. it. So that's one of the explanations. Although, of course, internal explanations are also possible, and there's some literature on this issue. So in Kalmyk, there is agreement. Of course, there is no agreement for the third person, as elsewhere in many other languages, including all Altaic languages. Interestingly, agreement is not evenly distributed across all finite forms. So if we take the list of all forms that are somewhere between finite and non-finite forms, then those forms which are more finite are distinguished by obligatory use of agreement markers, whereas less finite forms are either optional or sometimes not even, don't even take agreement at all. Interestingly, and this brings me back to my favorite topic of, let's say, constitutionality of Kalmyk. The use of many morphological markers is not so much determined by part of speech membership of individual words, but rather it's determined by the syntactic structure. So, for example, agreement markers, and that's an argument in favor of treating them as lytics rather than affixes, can actually be attached to any sort of word which happens to function as a predicate in a particular sentence. For example, here in 44, we see something like Chikkunde kirkugach no hach. So uga is something like there is nothing. But this is probably not very polite, and it's from a natural text. But what's said here is something like, I know, you are not a useful thing to anybody. And the head is, there is no. Yeah, there is no need in you to anybody. And although this thing is, there is no need, and probably you can also, if you remember very well what we discussed previously, you know that this is also the carative marker, but it accepts the agreement when it happens that it is there in the predicate position. So sentence 5. Okay, dog or bitch is not less surprising, so to say. So you are a bitch, will be like a bitch, and the second person agreement. That's it. Yeah. Unfortunately, no. But I think it's more a question of, let's say, register and language preservation. So I think that for elder speakers, it used to be obligatory. So younger speakers model sentences like that very much Russian style. So I'm a student, they will probably say something like I student, that's it. Whereas elder speakers would say something like I student and then agreement marker. But no tense, by the way. So that's one of the things which clearly distinguishes nouns from verbs. Verbs can't go without slot number 5. Nouns can, even when they are predicates.
And for the usual class to be with historical couple, and then we use a little marker on the noun.
Yeah, it's a very good question. So there are two possibilities. So one possibility is to just add non-present tense markers directly to these stems. Another possibility is to use be, and there is a verb, like copula verb to be, and attach tense markers with those. There is a very complicated distribution. Frankly, I don't remember it pretty well. I remember both possibilities are present, but I can't say which one is used when. And I also admit that it might be a question of generational shift as well. So I presume that younger speakers will use copulars, Russian style. Older speakers can use nouns as if they were verbs. That's good. So a few words about interrogative sentences. So you probably remember it's morphological expressed, though there are dedicated interrogative markers within the verb form. And interestingly, so like here, should I or may I bring one more person to your compartment in the on the train, something like that. By the way, you probably remember we talked about pronouns for some time, and there was like Taldin was you for plural, and I discussed at some length whether or not din should be treated as a plural marker. And again, when there are like you two, it's just you without any plural marker, and then this word for two. Yeah, so it's interesting. Anyway, the morphological marker is there in the verb form, and interestingly, it's there even if the question is not a yes/no question, but rather a partial question. So this is typologically unusual. General questions are morphologically marked in many languages of the world. Partial questions do that much more rarely, and there is a good explanation for this because partial questions have WH words with them, so like where, when, what, and some things like that. And well, this is very redundant. Like for example, whose cow is this? So Kenya, this is direct speech. So question will be like, ancient Kenya, and this is quite enough because Kenya is already whose. But nevertheless, the predicate, which happens to be the noun, cow, still has this interrogative function. Okay? All right. And the interrogative words are typically found in situ, so in the same, they are not moved anywhere. And this is also typical of other Altaic languages. Sometimes they are found in the focal position, so before the verb, but generally they are in situ. Okay, so we are finished with the third part, which is on verbs, and what's left will be spent on close combining. Those of you who use computers, please switch to the next presentation. Okay, so the final part. Like 45 minutes, yeah, that's what we got. Alright. We got something like 45 minutes, yeah. Good. So some basics. In fact, most of the time I will speak about very boring things because they're very, very similar to something you will also encounter in all Altaic languages. But I hope to have enough time to also briefly discuss a pattern which I think is less widely known. So the basic things and the boring stuff. So the boring stuff is that dependent clauses are typically non-finite. Well, Altaic languages are all like that, or used to be all like that, although some are influenced by Russian and other languages and start to use finite dependent clauses. In traditional grammar, you must get accustomed to this. These non-finite forms are referred to as participles of converbs, but it's not very useful, so it doesn't mean that every form that you refer to as a participle is used as a participle very often. It can be used as a participle, but typically it's very marginal kind of use. Around 10 non-finite forms in Kalmyk, and this is, while it seems to be a gross simplification and huge simplification of a system which could have been inherited from common Mongolic period, because other Mongolic languages actually employ much more non-finite forms. For example, in Oirats there are no less than 25 different forms, and some of these didn't have any direct correspondence in Kalmyk. So whether it was an innovation there or a loss here is not entirely clear, or probably both. Anyway, as you guess, the use of non-finite forms typologically correlates with non-use of conjunctions, although the correlation is not absolute. But here the situation is nice and neat, so we do use non-finite forms, and we almost do not use overt complementizers or conjunctions. So in fact there are two elements which can be analyzed as complementizers, and both of them happen to be converbs of the verb to say, which is again very common in these areas. So there are many languages like that. Okay. So now we'll briefly go through three main types of dependent clauses. So I'll start with adverbial clauses, and then we'll have something about complementation punctuation and growth clauses. So two main strategies are converbs, very rich, many different converbs which denote nuances of meaning, such as simultaneity or precedence or maybe concession or things like that. And as I said, two conjunctions based on verb to give are both found in the verbal domain. So what is a very interesting and also well understood phenomenon, although the details across Altaic languages are of course different, is the use of non-nominative subjects in dependent clauses. So like in example 1, you brought the soap in order for me to wash my hands. So what we see here, you brought soap, the soap is okay, but then namagın karanlıkta you have. So this is the conjunction. Let's say in order for someone to something like that. But here we've got I wash my hands. But what's important is that I is the accusative form rather than the nominative form. Okay, so it's definitely not the recipient from the main clause because it would have been dative. So for some exceptional reasons, by the way, there is no unlike control situations like I saw him enter the room and things like that. You can't say that it's somehow related to the case frame of the main verb. The case frame of the main verb doesn't have anything to do with this exceptional marking of the dependent subject because the main clause is already there, it's full, it's understandable, you brought so. However, this is the accusative form. Morphologically, syntactically, it behaves as the dependent clause subject, which is manifested in many different ways. For example, as you can see here, so I hope maybe you don't again, but the hands, which are there in the dependent clause, are marked with the possessive reflexive marker. And if you remember, possessive reflexive markers always obligatorily have at their antecedent the subject. So in order that I wash my hands, чтобы я помыл свои руки, something like that. And despite the fact that this argument is non-canonically marked, it's syntactically a subject. Yeah, so it's not in order that someone who is I washes the hands which are mine. The use of first person possessive is not possible here. It's obligatory possessive reflexive. Okay. So this is just a tiny piece of evidence, of course, but we could have discussed more evidence that in most important respects these non-nominative arguments behave syntactically as subjects. Yes.
Question about the real object of the main clause. It's without marking, and if it would be with accusative marking, could be the subject of that.
It's not. There is no difference. No. Yeah, good point. Well, this cannot be analyzed as anything like a direct object of break. Yeah. So this is one of those complex verbs. So in order to say break, you have to say take and come. Right? But this is transitive, yes, but it could have been intransitive, whatever. This one could have been marked with the verb accusative, but nevertheless. So this is the syntactically subject. Okay. So what's important is that in fact out of those numerous converbs which I mentioned, most types, actually all except two I think, are actually case forms of participles, so nominalized verbal forms, like for example this one, which is, well, relatively frequent. We call it successive converb. Well, it's frequently used in narrative context, although it's like the second most frequent converb in narrative context is this one, which is marked by kla. With doing this and that, he then did something else or something like that. And its marker is kla, and you can analyze it even synchronically as a combination of the participle, which is her, and the commutative case marker, which is kla. So it's basically looks like a very regular nominalized form of the verb, and it's used for combining clauses together. But what's important is that with this potential of using noun-like forms as heads of dependent clauses, speakers of Kalmyk actually have a very fine instrument to signal switch reference. That is, to signal overtly whether or not subjects in the main clause and in the dependent clause are identical. So let's take this one as an example. As I told you, this is, well, historically or maybe even synchronically, a combination of a participial marker and a commutative case form, which is la. But then, if it's a nominal form and it's used in the dependent clause, we expect some possessive marker as well. And actually, we do find possessive markers very often, and the choice of the possessive marker actually signals the reference of the subject of the clause at issue. So let's see example 2, which is, of course, taken from an actual narrative about a girl who made a funny joke about her little children, about her little sister, trying to make this little sister drink some vodka. And as she didn't want to drink vodka, I opened her mouth. That's what's here. So the one who didn't want to drink vodka is not overtly mentioned, but this is the smaller girl. So she didn't want to do this, and you see that the kla thing, so this convert, also has this nye marker, which is third person possessive marker. So something like, well, in a very, very little translation into English, it would be something like, with her not willing to drink vodka, I opened her mouth. Okay, so, but the subjects are different. She didn't want to do that, but I did something else. And you see that the possessive marker is third person. So it looks like climb. Whereas here in 3, which is unfortunately an illicit example, but things like that are quite natural. But Mark comes, much more powerful. But Mark comes home in the evening and he goes to bed. So the same person. And what we see here is that kla is that, well, this convert is overtly marked with kla, and I understand you can't remember the case paradigms from, I don't know, 3 days ago, but 2 days ago. But believe me that it's actually slightly non-transparent, but nevertheless quite predictable form of the. So her is actually the participle part, and la is something that you expect if you want to convey the meaning of the commutative case with a possessive reflexive marker. So something like, I went there with my dog, will be noha lar. So with my dog, noha lar, the same thing. So importantly, here, what we see is that when Balma comes home, he goes to bed. This is obligatory interpreted as same subject. This is a very nice tool to retract reference in narratives, given that most references are not mentioned overtly too often. So, for example, in these two examples, for example, here you don't see nothing. Here we don't identify the possessor, so you have to track who was doing what based on grammatical markers rather than overt pronouns or noun phrases. Okay, but anyway, you see it from the use of verb forms that this one is a different subject configuration, whereas this one is the same subject configuration. This is overtly marked by possessive morphology within the non-finite verb forms. This is sometimes found in other Altaic languages, but not a very persistent features as far as I understand. So many other Altaic languages have dedicated same subject converbs. It is true. Some languages also have dedicated different subject converbs, but not many of them have a neat morphological contrast, which will signal whether the particular configuration is the same subject or a different subject. So it's more reminiscent of switch reference systems, which are commonly found in other areas of the globe, such as New Guinea, for example, but not very, very typical of Altaic languages, as far as I know. Yeah, do you have some like morphological contrast in Kalmyk? Okay, in Bashkir we know. So in standard Turkey, there's nothing like that. Okay. All right. So a few words about complementation strategies. So the three main types in order of decrease in frequency are again with noun-like participles or nominalizations, stuff like that. So nominalized forms of verbs which can take case markers and possessive markers. One of the two complementarizers we briefly mentioned with beta, the verb to say, and finally converbs in very peripheral situations like for example phrasal verbs. So he finished singing will be like having sung finished, something like that. But we won't discuss this. Anyway, what about nominalized complements? They are only present, very frequent. So generally speaking, if this is definitely the prevalent pattern. So normally these nominalized forms are marked in most contexts. They are marked for case and possession, and case reflects the subcategorization pattern of the main verb, and possession reflects the subject of the dependent clause. So let's have an example that will be seen. He saw that I threw a stone at the snake. So see is a transitive verb. So he saw something, but in this situation, this something happened to be not a referent, but a dependent clause. So some kind of situation, which was that I saw that I threw a stone at the snake, and that is why here we see the accusative marker. So see is a transitive verb and it needs a direct object, and in this particular case, this direct object bears the accusative marker. Whereas the possessive marker is the marker which refers to the subject of the dependent clause. So very, very literally, this is something like he saw that I threw. Well, he saw my throwing of a stone at the snake. Yeah, something like that. But again, you won't be surprised now, I hope, as there is this possessive marker. They again have this nice choice between real possessive markers like first person, second person, third person, and the possessive reflexive. So if the subject of the dependent clause is the same referent as the subject of the main clause, then you should use actually the possessive reflexive marker on the dependent nominalized verb. So Batur knows that he entered the university or successfully passed the exams to the university will be something like literally Batur knows his own entering to the university. Something like that. Okay, so the case is predicted and the use of the possessive reflexive again signals that the same person. If you, I don't have a minimal pair, but you don't obligatory use pronouns, but you can have instead of this, you can use something like or sin меня. So with the third person possessive marker, it would mean something like Batir knows that he entered the university, but he will be obligatory a different person, not Batir, somebody else. Batir's son, for example, something like that. Okay. So again, a very consistent system, at least it used to be a very consistent system of signaling same subject relations versus different subject relations. I emphasize this because I think it's a very prominent feature of Kalmyk grammar and also discourse organization, and I still hope to have time to say a few words about discourse organization. But I think it's both syntax and discourse organization. So they really track subjects very well, and they know signal overtly if the subject is the same or if the subject is not the same. So just in case I don't have enough time, I will say it right now. So they prefer to have the same subject everywhere. Whenever it's possible, they prefer to use same subject configurations as very, very long chains and do their best to preserve this perspective. And we'll see how they perform this.
You say that this is a feature that is prominent in other words, or is essential?
Frankly, about this I'm not quite sure. I think it's present in Oirats, because I remember some, I know, conference talk about this. And I'm not sure about Mongolic. I think it must be there as well. At least they definitely have this possessive reflexive marker. That is true. I know that for sure. Whether it's used in close combining, I'm not sure about Mongolic, how Mongolian, and I'm quite sure about Buddhism. Is there anybody who participated in Buddhism field work from MGO? No? Okay, sorry. Generally, I think yes. So, common Mongolic. These three. Again, peripheral Mongolic are different, but I don't know much about that. Okay, so what else? Yeah, in the indexical shift, just a few words about indexical shift. So it's possible in Kalmyk, and it's especially in dependent clauses which are headed by oblique mood forms, such as imperative things. Let's take a closer look at example 6. So our parents told us to bring the water. Okay, that's the translation. If we take the, so they said, give that just they had verb which is expected, and what's here come in the imperative form. It looks as if it were a direct speech. So they were parents, and what parents actually said, pronounced at some point in time, was something like bring the water to their children. Okay, so that looks like as if it were a direct quotation. However, the interesting thing here is that the subject of the dependent clause is first it's in the accusative case, and then it's we. So if it were, well, there are two possibilities that we can consider. First is that it's just the addressee of the main clause subject, of the main clause, of the addressee of the main clause, something. They told to us the following: bring the water. But in that case, we is expected because they told us this command was given to us, but we actually would expect the dative case, because to say needs the dative case for the addressee. Yeah. We can, for the sake of exposition, I will use something like this special intonation of direct speech. So if it were something like they talk to us, bring water. Something like there is a clear boundary between the main speech, the main clause, and the direct quotation. But nothing like that, because manige is not part of the main clause. So okay, it's one of the many non-nominative subjects from the dependent clause. But then it's crazy, because in the same very dependent clause, we see we as the non-nominative subject. And why is it we? Imagine it's I'm telling something about the story about me and my parents. Then this we is something which refers to Sirojasai, which includes Sirojasai. Okay? So it's my point of view. For my parents, it was ты, you. Sorry. For my parents, it was you. So as follows from this form of the verb. Yeah? But it's not like that. So we see some kind of a contrast here. So the pronoun is used as if the speaker of the main clause is responsible for the choice of the pronoun. So it's calculated in the universe where I am in the center. That's why this one is referred to as we. But the form of the verb is used as if it were in a universe where the parents who actually made this command are in the center. You never make commands to someone who is referred to as we. Okay, but nevertheless, morphosyntactically we have this contrast. So the phenomena of this kind are shift, and actually there was a presentation on indexical shift among the clusters and the English language. And so it's found commonly in many languages of northern Asia. I don't remember which was the language. Kalmyk. Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you. So it's a very interesting phenomenon. For some reason, it was like officially banned for several decades, but then it's often found in many, many different languages. And so it's the details. I don't think we go into further details, but this pattern is quite frequent in Kalmyk. Okay, a few words about relative clauses. They are almost exclusively non-finite, that is headed by participles. In other words, typologically speaking, we see the gap strategy, which means that the relativized participant is not overtly expressed in the dependent clause. And again, the system of participles is relatively small, so in fact the main one, and also which is referred to as past tense, and then the future one and the habitual one. So three which are encountered with noticeable frequency, and maybe some very few types we don't have to care about. Okay, I'm a little confused again and again with these chords, because your perspective will be dependent upon whether you are accustomed to Altaic languages from your previous experience. If you are, then you won't be surprised to see that they're fully neutral in terms of orientation. If you are not so very well accustomed to Altaic languages, you will need some introduction to what it actually means that they are neutral in terms of orientation. What this means is that one and the same participle is used to relativize upon subjects, direct objects, indirect objects, and sometimes even more peripheral participants. So, for example, here, the teacher told the boy who was using his hand too much to leave the game. So, let's say in Russian it would correspond to an active participle, so the boy who did something, and you receive this participle marker, sin, and it means that the boy is understood as someone who participated in the role of a subject in the dependent clause. He was using his hand, or something like that. Whereas in 9, for example, okay, it's again from a question, I'm sorry, it's elicited. Those girls to whom I gave the puppy, gave me this flower, okay. But here are the girls, and they are relativized from the dependent clause, which denotes the situation in which I gave them the puppy. So something like the girls given by me the puppy, something like that, more or less. So it's a participle, but what's important is that this is again the same verb participle. So the marker sin, past tense participle, is used both here and here. So the one who gave flowers to a girl, or flowers that were given by someone to a girl, or the girl who was given flowers by someone, are all expressed by the same morphological form of the participle itself. So in order to understand which was the syntactic role of the participant which was relativized, you have to use some extra clues. For example, you can see what's missing there. So by me, puppy, given, girl. Okay, guess. Yeah. So what was the role of the girl? If there was a situation of given where I was involved as the subject, the puppy was involved as the theme or thing given. Well, probably the girl was the recipient, and that's exactly what it means. Theoretically, it actually can mean something else. Maybe, I don't know, under some very strong discourse pressure, it can mean something, I know, in her presence I gave this puppy or something like that. So the girl is characterized by a situation where I gave some puppy to an unmentioned person, while the likeliest hypothesis is that she was the recipient, because the verb give actually, so to say, makes you expect a recipient. So they're totally neutral in terms of orientation. Here is the example that, for example, there was a situation, a particular kind of paint is characterized as a participant in a situation where I was drawing an apple. So guess what was the role of this paint? Okay, in English it will be something like, the paint with which I made the drawing of an apple is on the table. So, but this with which should be overtly expressed in English, or in Russian there will be a special case like краска, которой я нарисовал яблоко, or something like that, so instrumental case. But in Kalmyk you don't have any overt marker here, and you can only guess what was the role of this paint based on the lexical meaning of this verb and other clues. As you've noticed, so what I mentioned that there are several participles in Kalmyk. You now know that they do not differ in terms of the relativized participant. They're not like active, passive, and indirect object relativizers and things like that. But what's the difference? The difference is relative tense and aspectuality. Well, simplifying a lot, we can say that the main distinction is between simultaneity and anteriority. So, for example, in 8, Ochir is reading the letter that I'm writing. Ochir, mini, bichkige. So, this one is the one which I write right now, and you see that this is the participle, so the less frequent one. Whereas in here, I repeat the example with this apple and paint. So I have already made a drawing of an apple in the past, and this paint is characterized through its role in a prior event, and that's why the participle which is used here is the past tense participle. Okay, so there are some temporal and spatial differences, but there is no argument differences in terms of argument structure. And as you've noticed again and again, as you've already noticed, I guess, from these examples, that the dependent clause subject is again non-nominative. For example, here, mini is my, literally, or the first person pronoun in the genitive case, and the girl to whom I gave the puppet is something like a noun, looks as if it was a possessor within the dependent clause. So instead of marking the subject as the nominative, it's marked in the genitive, is omnipresent. So another possibility which is related to this one is to signal the subject of the dependent clause by the possessive marker attached to the head noun. This is a little unusual because there are many languages which attach possessive markers to the participle as such, and it makes a lot of sense. With the nominal, it's a little weird because, well, let's take a closer look at this example 11. Where is Batyr's book that you have read? So the possessor of the book is Batyr, and this is overtly expressed here. So Batyr is in the genitive case, and the book is the head of this nominal phrase. But this noun is also characterized, modified by a very short relative clause, which happens to consist of just one participle. So the one read. So far we don't know who was the reader, by whom was this book read. But is this overtly expressed? Yes, it is. But the way the overt marker defined here, it's attached as the possessive marker to the head of the whole noun phrase. So if I just showed you this word form in isolation, Victor Chin, it would simply mean your book. That's it. End of story. But it's not what's going on here in example 11. What's going on here in example 11 is that Batyr's book, we already know that the possessor is Batyr. actually participated in a situation of reading and is not averted. It can be alternatively something like chini, that is you in the genitive, umsin dictive. It's possible, but another possibility is to attach the possessive marker directly to the head in violation of the basic meaning of the noun and possessive marker. So this marker appears on the head of the noun phrase, but in fact it is syntactically related to the structure of the dependent clause. Okay? So again, this is something that Natasha Sadovolskaya studied a lot in many Altaic languages. I don't remember. Yes, and actually in Kalmyk as well. There are constructions like that, but they are slightly less common, as far as I understand, than those constructions where the possessive marker is actually used on the verb. So if it were here, we won't be surprised, because really the reading of this book was something performed by me, so we can sort of metaphorically imagine it as a reading belonging to you, sorry, in this case, yeah. But it's not the case. This is here on the head noun, and the book is definitely not yours in this situation. It's Batir's book, but a book which is related to your reading. Okay. Yes.
Maybe I missed it, but do you consider the girls in ninth sentence to be a part of the complement clause or part of
No. The girl is the subject of the main clause. Okay, maybe I should have used bracketing here. So, minikichik sin is the relative clause which functions as a modifier to these girls, and these girls are the subject of the main clause which did something else, not something very stupid. So they gave me this flower. Okay. I'm sorry. These examples are often like this.
Is nominative marking possible?
Here.
Yes.
Well, yes, but again, my problem is one and the same all the time. Nominative marking is possible, but it's not entirely clear whether it's just a question of register and gradual loss of Kalmyk. So in traditional grammars, it will be written like, I know, the good use of Kalmyk is to use the genitive here, although younger speakers under Russian influence don't use this pattern anymore. In fact, I think the situation is more complex, and there are some arguments that it's not quite random, the choice of these two things. So there is some variation. Unfortunately, I can't right now tell you what's the pattern, let's say. So what are the factors which determine the choice, other than preservation of language or loss of language. But generally, both possibilities are present. I just emphasize the slightly less usual one.
Is it possible in the example 9 to mark girls with first single person? Or it's always alternative marking, either genitive or possessive marking? Because we have the same in Kalmyk, but it's always possible to have both genitive subject and possessive agreement on the head.
I better check it in the book. I'm not sure if it's possible to use both simultaneously. My intuition will be like, you have to choose between the two options, but I'm not sure. I have to check it, so if it's written. Or look at the material into the materials.
Yeah, I definitely have missed something, but is it okay to like scramble something like but here the participle clause, the dependent clause here is like divided with but here, it doesn't belong there. Am I right?
This one here.
No, 11. This 11.
Yeah. Okay. This is like, well, it's
So can the dependent clause go all over the independent clause, or
well, normally, in fact, the possessor actually precedes the relative clause. Here it does not, because if possessor were in the usual noun phrase in initial position, it would be definitely something like the book read by Bartek, and it's not the meaning which was intended here. So that's why here the word order is slightly unusual. But generally, the relative clause as such, well, this example is not probably the best one, because the relative clause consists of just one verb. It's hard to check if it can be torn apart by some extra material. But generally, no, relative clauses are not torn into parts.
What about, I just don't get it perhaps, about the previous slide, number 8, which here, Oshir is reading the letter.
Number 8?
Yeah, that I'm writing now, because
Okay,
Oshir
probably
is
it's better not to use your laptops that much.
Huh?
Okay, I adverted the possibility to use your laptops during the course, but I didn't expect you all to ask me questions about all kinds of stuff. Okay, anyway, yeah. So what's the slide?
No, 8. It's slide 13. Sorry.
So what's the number on the slide?
Slide 13, example 8, about...
Okay.
Yeah, so Ashir is in the beginning and the reading is in the end. So,
Yeah.
am I right that the main clause is divided?
Yeah, the main clause is divided, that's okay.
So, it's normal possible for this language.
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, okay, the relative clause is modifying the direct object. The direct object is, it's an SOV language, so the direct object is immediately before the verb, and you have a relative clause which modifies the direct object. It's between the S and O. It's possible. Okay. Sometimes things like that are not very long, but if you, I threw the rotten tomatoes away or something like that. Rotten is theoretically a relative clause, very short one. Of course it's possible. You don't have to, like rotten tomatoes, throw them away or something. If it's very long, then yes. But it's the processing story, like Kalmyk style. You probably heard these steps about how long dependent clauses are processed by speakers of different languages. Okay, if the dependent clause is like 10 words long and there is only one subject, then probably the speakers of Kalmyk would prefer to use the object fronting, so to get rid of these objects first and then subject and verb. That's true, but it doesn't mean that this is not possible, and I think it's not that long. Okay, we only have something like 7 minutes, I think, but I really want to say a few words. 6. Okay, anyway, I want to say something about discourse organization. Of course, I know it's a torture to read this example, but I think you must be more or less impressed by just viewing it as a whole. So I wouldn't say it's very, very typical. Of course, it took me some time to pick an example which I hope can somehow impress you, but it's not that unusual either. So it's quite common in Kalmyk discourse to have stories like that. What's unusual here? The unusual feature of this example is that it only contains one finite form. It's actually found here in the very, very end of this sentence, let's say. And this final and finite form is actually the verb to die. And it's taken from a story where the speaker tells biography of her father. And the story ends with the father's death mentioned. But in fact, what we had before is a very long narrative about many different events which happened in his father's life. Something like, he was married to a girl who was not even 16 by his aunt, and then the speaker's father and her mother moved to Siberia, and they moved there, both of them, and they buried both, this is a typo, they buried 2 of their children there, and then the father died himself. So quite a bit of time, yeah. So like something like 30 years or something, and quite a lot of information. So many clauses like 1, 2, 3. Okay, depending clause I don't count. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, 8 events which are not very much causally related to each other, so and so forth. Yeah, so theoretically it would have been like separate sentences. And in terms of causation, for example, and things like that, it sounds like similar to a narrative in any other languages where speakers will have like final clause, the intonation falls in the end of these episodes, and so forth. But morphosyntactically, these forms are still non-finite. So the old tradition of random and things like that in Russian translations will be to use converbs, and theoretically these forms are converbs. Something like after being married by his aunt, and after at the time when she even wasn't 16, and after moving to Siberia, and after taking us along, and after bearing their 2 children in Siberia, he died. So the usual perspective from those people who work on discourse organization will be to say something like, okay, the main clause is like foregrounded, something the most important thing, whereas the non-finite forms are typically backgrounded in many other languages. Here is not the case. These converbial clauses are not backgrounded because in this situation, if you assume that they're backgrounded, then that's a story about father's death. It's not true. It's a story about father's life. Yeah, or at least a very long part of it. Nevertheless, situations like that are omnipresent, so many different episodes are linked together in long chains. And one more important thing is that all things being equal, of course, it's not like a constraint in the grammar of Kalmyk, but discourse preference. All other things being equal. Speakers of Kalmyk not only prefer to use long chains of different clauses tightly knit together, but they also prefer to view those situations which are in this chain from the point of view of a particular protagonist who is in the center of the perspective. So to maintain the same subject across these chains of clauses. For example, here it's procedural discourse. So this tag describes what should be done before you establish a new yard or a new husbandry, let's say. So what should be done, or what is typically done, is that our folks, our guys, pray together, bring the lama, seat him, like make him sit down, something like that, make him read the doctrine or something like that, so it's no actually Greek word historically, make him read prayer or sermon or doctrine or something like that. That's what they do. And again, do is the final, the finite form which is only found here. So the order of some situation or events which happen before the new yard is established. But let us think about what actually happens there. Imagine we film this. First we have these guys praying together. Okay, all right. Then a lama comes. Lama is a very respected person. You can't just say, okay, read the prayer. It's not allowed, it's not the way it happens. Actually, the lama is the most respected person in the whole village or maybe beyond this village, okay? So, of course, if a lama comes, it's on his own will that he does this. And theoretically, in a different language, you could have presented this order of situations in the following way. Then our guys pray together, and then a lama comes and sits down and reads a sermon, and then what's happening, something like that. But it's not what is done here. So if you view the situation from the perspective of the guys who are arranging this thing or something, you prefer to use the causative here, as if they were making him sit and making him read this prayer, which is not something that actually happened. There is no causation as such. But with this situation, if it were something like a lama is reading the sermon, it would require a shift of the perspective. It would need a different subject. So the guys pray, whereas the lama is reading the sermon. But with this trick, you homogenize the whole sequence as if it were a sequence of events that actually the protagonists do. I only have this one example here in the slides, but as I announced before, this is one of very few things in these lectures which I did myself, and so I'm so in love with this topic. And believe me, there are some textual accounts about the use of causative verbs. And the causative verbs are very frequently found, like more frequently than you could expect based on independent knowledge, so to say, independent clauses in exactly situations like that. So in exactly those dependent contexts where using the causative verb makes it possible to maintain homogeneous perspective throughout the text. Whereas without causativizing, it would sound as if the perspective is shifted. So you view this from a particular vantage point, and then you shift to another vantage point as if you are a llama, and do this and so forth. Okay, here you continue to view things as if they were performed by these guys. And sometimes it also has syntactic effects. So for example, let's say this is the last slide. Yeah, this is the last slide. So this is the dependent clause of purpose. So I send my children off to sleep. So what's here? The dependent clause is headed by purpose converb. So in order to do something. But what's the verb which is in the dependent clause? It's not to sleep, it's to make sleep. So I send my children away in order to make them sleep. That's the most literal translation of this. Does it make sense? Well, syntactically it does, because the subjects in the two clauses are identical. Semantically it doesn't make too much sense, because, okay, if I send my children away, can I make them sleep after this moment? No, I don't see. They're frolicking in their bedroom. Yeah, that's it. So, in fact, in order to really cause a situation like that, the causation must precede this sending away, like, go to sleep. But it's not, in the most literal translation of this, it's not what happens here. What happens here, the dependent clause contains causative verb. So semantically it doesn't make much sense, syntactically it does lots of sense. So it's very economic and elegant. And in fact, the causative of to sleep, normally out of context, would mean something like this. Yeah? But here it does not. So I think that it's the discourse organization is a very relevant factor which can influence the use of devices like the choice of voice, and eventually can also have syntactic effects or reference track. Okay, thank you. Maybe we got the references in the end of this of this fourth presentation. So if you have to find it here. Okay, thank you.